between trying to pay for my portion of the rent and groceries and paying for the child support and alimony. I was barely scraping by. I was struggling so hard trying to make ends meet and was burning myself out. I could work overtime, but the more I made, the more I would just have to give to Wendy. And then the worst news possibly happened. My boss came to me one day at work and told me that I was being laid off. The company needed to trim a bunch of workers, and unfortunately, I was one of those that was let go. I tried to plead my case, but there was nothing he could do. That month, when I couldn't give Wendy the money I was being forced to pay her, she called me up and screamed at me. I was done listening to her, and so I hung up on her and blocked her calls. But then after a couple of months of this, some police officers showed up at my home and told me that I was under arrest for refusal to pay my alimony and child support. Hi there, my name is Ryan, and my life has been hell for the last few years. I have been through the ringer, and while my story does have a happy ending, let me tell you. There were times when I wasn't sure that it would. I really was scared that things would constantly get worse. But there is one thing that really has helped me through all of this, and that is when things get really bad. That is when you know who your real friends are, who the people are that you can really trust, and thankfully, I surrounded myself with such people. It all started several years ago when I got married to Wendy. Things started off well enough, but it didn't take long before Wendy started showing signs that she had been hiding who she truly was the entire time. For starters, when we were dating, she would make a point of making most of our meals. But soon after we were married, she refused. Hey babe, that was a long day, but all that overtime will help at the end of the month. What's for dinner?
How the hell should I know?
Oh, I just figured since you only worked a half day that you wouldn't mind making dinner. But if you're tired, then we can always order out.
And now you want to waste money on ordering takeout? Get off your lazy ass and just make us something. It better be healthy though.
Of course it wasn't like that all the time, but at least 5 nights a week, no matter if I put in overtime or not, I would be responsible for dinner. And if Wendy didn't like what I made, then she would throw away her portion and order delivery. Honestly, the amount of times that she did that really started to add up as well. And I know what you're thinking. She was working as well, and it would be wrong of me to expect her to always cook, but she only worked part-time a few days a week and only 4-hour days. And she worked at a bank as a teller, which can be stressful, but her branch was never busy. While I tended to work 12-hour days Monday to Friday, and 8 on Saturdays in a salt mine. I thankfully never have to go to a gym as I get a workout every day I work. But it was more than just that. Even when it came to cleaning, I would have to do the larger share. In the beginning, this annoyed me, because after a long day mining, my body was sore and aching, and the last thing I wanted to do was to vacuum the whole house and do 3 loads of laundry. But that was how things went. Then one day, Wendy came home and told me that she was pregnant. I found this odd as our love life had been very infrequent since we got married, but I figured that didn't really matter. The only thing I could think of was that I was going to be a father. The thought of it made me so incredibly happy. On the day that my twin sons were born, I introduced them to my brother George, who agreed that they were incredibly cute. When our sons were born, I had assumed that Wendy might change and become a bit softer, but she instead was constantly angry with me. I never knew what I did to upset her, but no matter what, she would yell and curse me out.
Ryan, did you do the dishes?
Yes, of course.
You did? Fine. What about cutting the grass?
I haven't gotten around to cutting the grass yet.
You are so lazy. My mother warned me about how much of a loser you are and how I shouldn't have married such a useless boy.
Okay, that's enough. Damn it, Wendy. I do more around here than you do, and I'm sick of you giving me grief. Why do you always have to pick a fight with me?
Oh, is the little man upset? I'll give you something to be upset about.
I was scared, and I thought that she was going to hit me. But then she grabbed a frying pan and smacked herself in the face with it, hard enough to split her lip and to cause a massive black eye. Staring at her with a fiendish grin on her face, I was so confused, until she then called the police and told them that I had hit her. And then it suddenly made sense. There was no way they were going to believe that she had hit herself, and sure enough, when they showed up, they hit me a few times with their clubs and then threw me into the back of a squad car. I ended up spending the next week in jail until I was finally released. I had no intentions of going home, as I did not want to provoke Wendy again. and so I went to stay with George while I figured things out. That was when Wendy served me with divorce papers. As painful as it was, I knew that this was for the best, but I had no idea that this was only the beginning of more trouble. During the divorce proceedings, I applied to get equal custody, so that I would still be able to see our boys, but the court denied my request since I had been charged with domestic violence. I pleaded that it was a fake charge, but no one other than George would believe me. In the end, I was granted limited access, where I would only see my sons a couple of days a month, and only while supervised. It was so infuriating. On top of that, I was forced to pay alimony and child support. The two combined added up to over 80% of my paycheck. Between trying to pay for my portion of the rent and groceries and paying for the child support and alimony, I was barely scraping by. I was struggling so hard trying to make ends meet and was burning myself out. I could work overtime, but the more I made, the more I would just have to give to Wendy. And then the worst news possibly happened. My boss came to me one day at work and told me that I was being laid off. The company needed to trim a bunch of workers, and unfortunately, I was one of those that was let go. I tried to plead my case, but there was nothing he could do. That month when I couldn't give Wendy the money I was being forced to pay her, she called me up and screamed at me. I was done listening to her, and so I hung up on her and blocked her calls. But then after a couple of months of this, some police officers showed up at my home and told me that I was under arrest for refusal to pay my alimony and child support. Just like with Wendy, I tried to explain that there wasn't anything that I could do. I spent every day looking for work, but I just couldn't find a job that would pay enough to cover the money I was being forced to pay her and to still be able to live on top of that. They dragged me to court, and sadly the judge that presided over my case didn't care and sentenced me to 3 years in prison for failure to pay what I owed. It was maddening. After all, how was I supposed to pay my bills while in prison? On top of that, the judge told me that I would be expected to pay all the payments that I missed once I got out of prison, and that any money I made for the rest of my life would be garnished until I had repaid every last penny. To be honest, I hit rock bottom and contemplated just ending things, but then my brother told me to use the prison library and maybe try to find a way out of my situation. He suggested that perhaps there was a law that would help me. I had literally nothing better to do, and so I studied hard, but the only thing that I could come up with was that if I could prove that Wendy had faked being attacked, or if the boys weren't mine, then I could charge her with fraud and reverse my sentence and all of the insane payments as well, but that was a major problem. However, my brother told me that he would see what he could do. 2 months later, my brother came to visit me in prison and had the biggest grin on his face. When I asked him why he was so happy, he showed me a folder he had with him. When I saw what was inside it, I began to smile as well. He had hired a private investigator who was a woman to befriend Wendy, and while hanging out, Wendy had admitted to her that she had faked when I assaulted her and even recorded it. I couldn't believe that he was able to get that, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. The private investigator also was able to run some paternity tests on my sons. Apparently, during a drunken night out, Wendy had admitted that neither of my sons were mine. She confessed that she had constantly cheated on me and wasn't even sure who the real fathers were. That was hard to read, but I knew that it was exactly what I needed to get myself out of this terrible situation. And so I took what my brother had gathered and petitioned the court to review the new evidence that I had gathered. A month later, I received word that a judge would hear my case, and upon hearing the evidence I had along with the fact that Wendy had sworn under oath that I had abused her, and that both sons were mine only for all of it to be a lie, she reversed the charges against me and charged Wendy with fraud, which meant that I was now free from prison, but there was more. The judge decided that all the money that I had paid Wendy was unlawfully taken from me, and so it would need to be repaid along with interest. Furthermore, since she was now a convicted criminal, she was now the one that would have to pay me child support and alimony. At least she would once she was out of prison, and the judge sentenced her to 10 years behind bars. Much like what was supposed to happen to me, she was on the hook to pay me for all the years that she was in prison as well. So once she got out, her wages would be garnished, and she would pay me back for all the money she owed me, plus interest as well. It was such a sweet reversal, and the look of shock and fear that was on her face when she heard the judge's decision nearly made my time in prison worth it. Once she was away in prison, I was left with the knowledge that my sons weren't mine, but honestly, they are the one thing from my marriage that I do not regret. Even though they aren't my flesh and blood, they are still my sons. And maybe one day, we can figure out who their biological fathers are. But even then, that won't change how much I love them and how I feel blessed to be their father. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.